In the final lecture video this week, I'm going to discuss birth, reproduction, and natalism, which may be a new term to some of you, but we're going to walk through what it means. This lecture video is also going to focus particularly on U.S. policy when it comes to these issues. Pro-natalist policies are those that have either the intent or the effect to encourage people to have and raise more children. Examples of pro-natalist policies include those that limit access to things like birth control and abortion that could prevent people from having more children, and includes financial and logistical support in caring for young children, which may encourage people to have more children than they would have otherwise without that support. Anti-natalist policies are those that have the intent or effect to encourage people to have and raise fewer children. These can include penalties for having children, financial or punitive penalties. For example, in China, under the one-child policy during the latter decades of the 20th century, families that had more than one child were often fined substantial amounts of money. Anti-natalist policies can also include forced sterilization, mandatory use of birth control, and forced abortion. Anti-natalist policies can also include limits on supporting and caring for young children, failure to provide logistical or financial support for families that would like to have children but face logistical barriers in doing so. The U.S., more so than many other wealthy countries, has an inconsistent or even confusing mix of both pro-natalist and anti-natalist policies. When it comes to supporting people caring for infants and young children, or planning to care for infants and young children, the U.S. is incredibly anti-natalist. Policies that do not support families in caring for infants and young children. As you can see from this map, the U.S. is one of very few countries in the world that does not provide paid maternity leave to new mothers. Maternity leave refers to the ability for mothers to take time away from work to recover from childbirth and to care for newborns and infants. The lack of paid maternity leave in the U.S. may affect some families' ability to have children at all and is therefore anti-natalist. Similarly, the U.S. lacks paid paternity leave, or the ability for fathers to take time away from work to support partners recovering from childbirth and/or care for newborns and young infants. Most wealthy countries in the world also provide some form of paid paternity leave in addition to maternity leave. The cost of childcare also inhibits families' abilities or desire to have children in the U.S. I know this bar graph may be a little bit difficult to read, but the U.S. is the third most expensive country for childcare of all wealthy developed countries. The average is this dark bar here in the middle, and the U.S. is much more expensive than the average of these countries. The only countries with more expensive average childcare costs are the United Kingdom and New Zealand. And I hope you can understand why having prohibitively expensive childcare would also be a policy that would inhibit couples from deciding to have children. At the same time, however, the U.S. is overwhelmingly pro-natalist when it comes to issues of abortion and birth control. Both are difficult to access in the U.S. compared to other parts of the world. Let's first look at the availability of oral birth control. The dark blue countries on this map show where oral birth control, the pill, is available only by prescription, requiring a doctor's visit, a medical exam, and related expenses. Particularly in the U.S., where medical care can be difficult or expensive to access, this can create a serious burden to accessing birth control, as can the cost of the pill. As you can see here, many countries make oral birth control available for free. However, in the U.S., that is not the case. Finally, let's talk about abortion. Abortion refers to the termination of pregnancy, whether spontaneous or induced. Induced abortions have a long history in all human societies with varying degrees of legal and social regulation. In the U.S., abortion was legally and uncontroversially practiced until around 1880. The criminalization of abortion coincided with the male professionalization of women's health care, which had previously been in the purview of women, both professional and unprofessional. Interestingly, unlike current debates around abortion, the initial criminalization of abortion in the late 19th century was not religiously motivated. Instead, eugenicists and other racist policymakers inside the American Medical Association pushed for abortion to be criminalized because they were concerned that too many white women were seeking abortions, and that this would dramatically change the racial makeup of the United States. A small handful of individual states began to decriminalize abortion again in the 1960s, before it was decriminalized nationwide in 1973 in the Roe v. Wade decision. By this time, the American Medical Association encouraged decriminalization, because abortions had never stopped in the U.S., and were instead undertaken by unprofessional, unskilled, and dangerous practitioners. Thousands of women died every year from attempted abortions. In fact, maternal mortality fell by 45% in the year after New York State decriminalized in 1970. Much like the earlier movement for the criminalization of abortion, this decriminalization in the 1960s and 1970s was originally not a particularly religiously salient issue outside of the College of Catholic Bishops and other practicing Catholics in the U.S. For example, in 1968, as many states were decriminalizing abortion care, the Christian Medical Society and the Christian magazine Christianity Today, the flagship magazine of evangelicalism, refused to characterize abortion as sinful, instead citing individual health, family welfare, and social responsibility all as justifications for ending pregnancy. The Southern Baptist Convention repeatedly voiced support for abortion in some or all circumstances throughout the mid-1970s. It wasn't until the late 1970s and early 1980s that the moral majority white Protestant evangelical movement began promoting the issue of abortion as a means of uniting this block of voters after issues like pornography, prayer in schools, and opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment failed to inspire collective political organization. As a result, abortion eventually came to be seen as an incredibly divisive and reactionary issue around which political parties in many states organized. And just as abortion became legal at the state level before Roe v. Wade, many states are now gradually becoming more restrictive and hostile to abortion rights. In this map, you can see that the darker orange states all have policies that are extremely hostile to abortion care. And as the initial criminalization of abortion care had negative consequences for maternal mortality, so too do these newer restrictions. This map of maternal mortality shows that many of the states with restrictive abortion laws also have higher maternal death rates. Unlike the lack of U.S. policy on paid family leave and subsidized childcare, which discourage people from having children, the country's approach to abortion and birth control have a pro-natalist effect, or encourage more people to have and raise children, whether they choose to or not. As this quote from a report by the National Partnership for Women and Families demonstrates, the U.S. has long had a contradictory approach to how it treats issues of birth and reproduction. The National Partnership for Women and Families here encourages our nation's policies to be more universally supportive of women and families.